are continuing to add to our toolbox in working with strings, and in this lesson we're going to explore several additional methods, including using the find function to find characters in a string, splitting a string, concatenating a string as well. And this is only a subset of all of the tools, methods that are available to use with strings, but these are some of the more common ones. I encourage you to always be taking a look at the links that I share with you. W3 Schools is a useful tool for some introductory methods in Python, and if you go there and look at strings, you're going to see quite a bit of useful information and examples. So we're going to start with the find function, or the find method, I should say. The find function is a method that can be applied to a string in the following form. We reference a string. We've been using the symbol S, and we attach, using dot notation, a method. So what we're asking Python to do in this statement is find the letter C in string S. So let's try that in an example. We have our S equal to the first several letters of the alphabet, and then we're going to find letter C. So what are we going to get back? Okay, we get back a 2. So what does that mean? Well, the output when we use the find function is the index of the first instance of the character that we search for. And notice that I did have to use quotes because it is a string within a string. So letter C is at index 2. So A is at index 0, B is at index 1, and C is at index 2. All right, so we should always explore some edge cases to see what happens if we search for a character that is not in the string. So obviously letter Z is not part of this string of characters. If I try to use the find method for letter Z, I don't actually get an error, but I get a -1. So this is a case where we need to make a note of the output. I'll try to remember it for now, but if we forget, we can always look it up. A -1 is how Python communicates that this letter is not in the string. Okay, so that's kind of a specialized output that we want to get used to. Sometimes we encounter methods like this where if you do something wrong, you don't get an error, and that can be useful if we're writing a program where, say, some parts of the program operate independently of other parts. And when you get an error as part of a program, which is a collection of code, if you have an error anywhere, it's going to stop your program from continuing and moving on to the next step. So it can be useful to know about methods that don't generate errors, that perhaps have different ways of communicating that a result didn't work the way we intended it to. And then this is one of those cases. So that's using the find function. We can separate a string into its elements using the split method, and it looks like this. The split method has open close parentheses on the end of the word split, and let's take a look at an example. So here we are defining a string W with the phrase "we are learning Python." I can reference string W and then use dot notation to attach this method. And notice what I'm specifying in here. I'm specifying the character that's going to indicate where I want to split that string. So because I've specified a space, so notice there actually is one space in between those quote marks, I'm going to separate the words "we are learning Python" into separate entities. Here's another example of how I could split, how I could use the split method. I think it's helpful to see more than one example here. If I have dots separating the words, I could split according to the dots, and then I would be separating those individual words. So let's try those out. Here we go, and notice that we get an output that we have not seen before. but we're going to learn about this in much greater detail in later weeks. But at this point, all you really need to know is that this output is something called a list, and a list can be recognized by the syntax where we have square brackets and commas separating the individual elements. Okay, so now the elements of this list are the individual words that made up that string. Just to give us one more example, let's take a look at splitting on a different character. And there we have it. The words were separated again into a list. And then lastly, we're going to take a look at how we can join together individual strings to form one larger string. So let's see what would happen if we added together the words we are learning Python. Well, the result would just be one long string of those characters with no spaces in between. If we wanted a recognizable sentence, we would actually have to add in the spaces in between the words, and we can use a plus symbol, knowing that we're not doing mathematical addition, we are doing string addition, string concatenation. I don't know why I have trouble with that word, but we can mash together all of these strings into one. So if we do that here, I don't have spaces, so I don't get a recognizable sentence. It looks bad. So here I have added in the spaces and put together a single string using those individual strings. So that's a lot of work. I don't want to have to do all that. So I'll show you an example, and usually when I'm in class I have students just search, see how you could join together the individual elements of a list. I'm going to actually create a list here, list R, with the terms I want to combine, and I'm using the square brackets and commas to separate those words. I can use a method called join, and the usage for this method is a little bit unusual, so I often have to look this up. How do I join the characters and to form a string? Join characters in a list to form a string. So what I'm going to do is indicate the character I want to use in order to join together those terms. So if I don't have any character there, they're just all going to be mashed together. So I'm going to use a space. So there actually is a space in between those quotation marks. And then I'm going to use the join method and then the argument, right? So what I put into the parentheses in the join method is that list R, and that's going to put everything together into the phrase that I wanted to generate. I can also take a look at the type to convince us that that is in fact a string. Okay, so there we go. So what we have done is we have looked at 3 useful techniques that we can use with strings. The find function, find method, I should be saying that. The find method, which we know returns the character, that returns the index of the character we are finding. If that character does not exist in the string, we get a -1. We learned how to split a string using the split method, specifying a character we want to use in order to split apart a string, and we get back a list. And we have also learned how to concatenate a string using the join method. Really useful tools to use with strings.